Mike versus the world. This edition, a crazy one. Who is a more well-rounded football team, the Georgia Bulldogs or the Michigan Wolverines? Mike, this is a really tough one. I really wish I had a passion one way or the other, but I'm going to lean the Georgia Bulldogs for a few simple factors. One, I trust their quarterback play a little bit more than Michigan's. I think obviously Stetson Bennett, while he's certainly not going to be the first overall pick in the draft or anything, he's been through some fires. He's been through some wars. He understands what playoff football is about. Again, he's not gonna set the world on fire per se, but he's got that experience. I think it's helpful. Kirby's got the experience. I mean, Jim Harbaugh doesn't really show up in big games. Can I say that? I think it just did. Kirby at least has figured out a formula at some point in time. Brock Bowers is an extraterrestrial, and I don't quite know how anybody can cover him outside of like 3 pterodactyls that are covering him on a field. So I'm gonna lean Georgia. I mean, their defense isn't as good as it was last year, but I would love my team to have Georgia's defense this year. That's not as good as last year's defense because it would still be the best in many schools ever. Although it's not up to Georgia par. I think they have more explosive weapons. I think Michigan, they're probably more methodical, maybe a more balanced team, I might say, maybe a little bit more structured. But I think if you're asking me more well-rounded, I'm going to give the nod to the fact that I've seen Georgia's quarterback do something, and Michigan has not yet proven to me that from the quarterback position.
Isn't balance the same as well-rounded?
No, I think balance in terms of pass run, I think they have a good balance, but in terms of you add in the play caller, you add in the head coach, you add in some of those other factors. That's how I think you make Michigan a little bit less rounded than Georgia's rounded.
It's a really good debate, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it is because you think of Michigan as the running football team, and they don't really have a lot of passing balance, and you still think sort of McNamara at quarterback. Because J.J. McCarthy is kind of being eased into the offense and kind of dumbed down as far as his natural ability to be a playmaker in the passing game.
Yeah.
But the thing I see about J.J. McCarthy that makes this a more, well-rounded football team to me than Georgia is this is a team. Last year, they couldn't come back if they fell down by 14 points, and we saw that in the playoff. This year they can because they've got, Ronnie Bell back. They've got Donovan Edwards in the passing game, and they got J.J. McCarthy, who's a better natural passer. Now, has he proven it like Stetson Bennett has on the big field? No, but he's also in his first year as a starter. Defensively, these two teams match up extremely well. Georgia gives up 9.1 points a game. Michigan gives up 12.1 points a game.
Whoa, what happened to us not doing stats here, by the way? You said these were organic conversations with no stats involved, and you're all of a sudden over here. You like your sports science and ESPN. What the hell?
It's a really cool debate.
Where you at?
Because, Ohio State could be mentioned in here too because they don't give a lot of points, but they haven't really played anybody.
More stats. Great.
Well, I think Georgia hasn't really played anybody either. And that's, to my point right now, if you're talking about a team that Georgia's going to line up and play a pro-style offense, they're going to run the football, they're going to work play action. Michigan's going to do the same thing. I feel more confident that a defense is going to have trouble stopping Michigan's two-headed rushing attack and that great offensive line, really great offensive line, than you would with Georgia. And then on the defensive side of things, Georgia's great, but they're not what they were last season. They don't have the freakishly athletic edge rushers. They don't have the linebackers that can run to the ball like Nakobe Dean and Channing Tindall.
Those guys are all gone. Yep.
They're a peg down from what they were last year. Michigan,
but they're still pretty freaking good. I mean,
right?
You're basically saying like, hey, your supermodel wife was a 10, now you're married to a 9.5, you bum. I mean, it's still a pretty good. It's still a pretty good measure.
This Michigan team is better than last year's Michigan team, and they might not even make the playoff because Ohio State's so good. And Georgia might not even make the playoff too.
You're judging a lot of that on you think J.J. McCarthy can do certain things that we haven't seen him do consistently. I don't disagree with you, by the way, that he's not a better fit for that offense. He's not a better fitted quarterback than Cade McNamara. But you're going on a lot of hope here, man. Hope's not a strategy in this case. You've never really seen him have to do it when the lights are on, when it has to happen. It's a whole different ball of wax. I think he has the potential. I think he has the potential.
The Stetson Bennett argument. That's a great argument. I mean, honestly,
I think he has the potential, but I kind of need to see him do it before I can absolutely say, yeah. Again, I look at this really two things. And I know this is a well-rounded question, but if I'm looking at these two teams and I'm saying, hey, I've got to pick one of these two, I give the nod to Georgia quarterback, and I give the nod to Georgia head coach. I just don't trust Jim Harbaugh in that big
That's
spot. I've seen him on that stage too often. I think he's still a fine coach, but I've never seen him figure out a way to make it all come together. So I give those two minor check marks over to the Georgia column, and that's where I get my well-rounded equation from.
yeah, it's a pretty good argument for sure. But I think, the offense is limited in a way. If you can bracket Brock Bowers, and I know you said he's uncoverable, but there's been a couple games this season where he hasn't really lit up the world. He didn't have to in the Oregon game, but he didn't have a great game there. And he's been shut down a couple times this season. And when they utilize him as a running back or an H-back or, get him involved and get him the touches, then he's extremely dangerous. But beyond that, I don't see a whole lot of depth at wide receiver. Not a scary amount of depth. Whereas
Agree.
Michigan's got Ronnie Bell and Roman Wilson has been a huge addition for them. At least an addition, a guy who's stepped up his game in the slot, who's been excellent. You got two very good tight ends. I thought when Eric All went down, they would be in big trouble. Nope, no problem there. And I've been really impressed with Donovan Edwards as a running back, as a pass receiver out of the backfield in the offensive line. So, I guess the argument here is, as you mentioned, they've taken a step back from a 10 to a 9.5. And I think Michigan's taken a step up from an 8 to a 9. So maybe Georgia, because they won a national championship, because Stetson Bennett's been there, done that before, because they have Kirby as the national championship coach and Harbaugh's never won one, they might have a slight advantage. But right now, based on the schedule too, I would go with Michigan as the more well-rounded football team. It's a toss-up, and that's why
I will say it's closer than I think people would on first glance. I think you'd go, Georgia, for sure. I think it's closer than you think about, and once you kind of lay it out, but I still think you got to give, again, 9.5, 9.3, right? Like, I think it's razor thin, but I think you got to give the edge.
Well, and the reason I chose it too is because you look at the other top teams in the country, not overly balanced. I mean, Alabama gave up 100 points to Tennessee. Tennessee's defense isn't that good. Clemson, we talked on a previous one about their offensive struggles at times. And there's just not a lot of teams out there that I think have this ability to beat you by pounding the football down your throat, beating you with play action, playing great defense, winning a low-scoring game or a high-scoring game. And that's kind of why I chose it, because, there's teams like, listen, Tennessee could win the national championship. It could be a situation where nobody can stop that offense, period. Ohio State, another one, offense. But there are defensive deficiencies, I think, at those teams that don't rear their head as much, at Georgia or as much at Michigan. So it's a good debate. There's no winner or loser to this, because I think they're both extremely well-rounded. But I think what I want to point out is that I think Michigan's right in there. So listen, I give you first choice. You chose Georgia. I tweeted the other day Georgia was first, Michigan was second. So, but I'm making the argument. I think this Michigan football team is vastly underrated when it comes to the balance and how scary this football team is. They could line up against some of these teams and just blow them up the football, Alabama included. And people don't believe that for a second, but I think it could happen.